They said we'd be dead in a week. The Valdran Imperium had swept through 47 star systems in just 3 months, their war fleets turning entire civilizations to ash without breaking stride. When their scout ships appeared at the edge of our solar system, every military analyst on Earth gave us the same prognosis: extinction. But the Valdran didn't know what they were walking into. They didn't understand that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't in our arsenals, it was in our nature. Commander Thane stood at the observation deck of the orbital defense station, watching the alien fleet materialize from hyperspace like a swarm of metallic locusts. There were hundreds of them, sleek vessels that caught the light of distant stars and reflected it back in shimmering waves. Behind him, his tactical officer counted them off with increasing dread in her voice. 200 and counting, sir. 250, 300. Thane kept his face neutral, but his hands gripped the railing until his knuckles went white. He'd served in the United Earth Defense Force for 30 years, rising through the ranks during humanity's expansion into the outer colonies. He'd seen combat during the Mars Rebellion and commanded troops during the Jupiter Station siege. But this was different. This wasn't humans fighting humans. This was something else entirely. Final count, sir. 417 vessels. Mass readings suggest capital ships, cruisers, and fighter escorts. They're holding position just beyond Neptune's orbit. Thane turned to face his crew. They were young, most of them. Fresh faces who joined the service expecting to patrol trade routes and keep peace between colony stations. Now they stared at their screens with the blank expression of people trying to process their own mortality. "Steady," Thane said quietly. "We knew they were coming. We've prepared for this." It was a lie, and everyone in the room knew it. You couldn't prepare for the Valdran. Intelligence reports from the few refugee species who'd escaped their advance painted a picture of overwhelming technological superiority. Energy weapons that could slice through hull plating like paper. Shield systems that rendered conventional missiles useless. Faster-than-light communication that coordinated their fleets with perfect precision. The communication console chirped. Every head in the control room turned toward it. "Sir, we're being hailed, audio only." Thane straightened his uniform jacket, put it through. The voice that filled the room was smooth, almost pleasant, with an accent that reminded Thane of someone speaking a foreign language through a universal translator. It was too perfect, each syllable precisely formed. "Primitive species of the third planet. I am Supreme Commander Velthais of the Valdran Imperium. Your system has been designated for annexation under Imperial law. You have 48 standard hours to surrender all military assets and prepare for occupation. Resistance will result in total planetary sterilization. Compliance will ensure your survival as a labor species within the Imperium. You have been given the terms. Choose wisely." The channel closed before Thane could respond. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Lieutenant Chen at the tactical station let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Labor species, they want to make us slaves." "That's not going to happen," Thane said. He activated his command communicator. "This is Commander Thane to all Earth defense stations. You heard their terms. Now hear mine. We don't surrender. We don't back down. Every man and woman on this station volunteered to stand between Earth and whatever threats came from the darkness. Today, that threat has a name. Today, we show them what humans are made of." Across the solar system, similar scenes played out. On Luna Base, General Martinez watched the alien fleet through her tactical display and began issuing orders to mobilize every available ship. On Mars, Admiral Kowalski recalled all patrol vessels to defensive positions around the orbital shipyards. And on Earth itself, in the underground bunkers of the Global Defense Council, President Chen addressed the world with steady words that barely masked the fear underneath. The Valdran hadn't expected a response. They'd broadcast their demand and settled into a holding pattern, confident that the primitives would see reason. Their experience across dozens of conquered worlds had taught them that technological superiority was its own form of persuasion. Lesser species always recognized when they were outmatched. But humanity's response wasn't surrender. It was silence. 48 hours of absolute, calculated silence while every defense station, every ship, every orbital platform made their preparations. Supreme Commander Velthais found the silence annoying. He stood in the command chamber of his flagship, the Eternal Glory, and studied the tactical display showing the human system. It was a typical arrangement for a primitive species: rocky inner planets, gas giants in the outer orbits, a sparse asteroid belt. The humans had established small colonies on several moons and maintained a network of orbital stations, but their technological level was laughable. Chemical rockets, primitive nuclear reactors, communication systems that relied on electromagnetic radiation. "They haven't responded to our terms," his second officer observed. "Should we interpret this as defiance?" Velthais made a gesture of dismissal with one elegant hand. The Valdrin were a tall species, with elongated limbs and faces that humans might have described as aristocratic. Their skin had a faint silver sheen, and their eyes were large and dark, adapted for low light conditions on their homeworld. They moved with a fluid grace that came from generations of genetic optimization. "Defiance requires capability," Velthais said. "They're simply processing their situation. Fear takes time to settle into acceptance. We'll give them a demonstration when the deadline expires. A single orbital bombardment should clarify their position." The officer nodded and returned to his station. Velthais studied the display again, noting the positions of the human defense stations. 37 major installations scattered across the system, along with perhaps 200 smaller vessels. It was almost insulting. The Valdrin had brought a full battle fleet to crush what amounted to a pre-spacefaring civilization playing with orbital mechanics. Still, protocol was protocol. The Imperium had learned from experience that even primitive species could be dangerous if cornered. Better to overwhelming force than to risk casualties through complacency. The fleet would remain at full combat readiness until the system was secured. On Earth, in a facility buried 3 miles beneath the Colorado Rockies, a very different conversation was taking place. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before a holographic display showing schematics that would have been incomprehensible to anyone without advanced degrees in quantum mechanics and exotic matter theory. Around her, dozens of scientists and engineers worked at stations filled with equipment that hummed with barely contained energy. "Status report," she said, not looking away from the display. "Quantum entanglement grid is stable," replied Dr. James Okoro from his station. "We're maintaining coherence across all nodes. Power draw is within acceptable parameters." "Temporal calculations?" Chen asked. "Locked in. We've run the simulation 6,000 times. Margin of error is 0.003%. Chen finally turned to face her team. She was 43 years old, with gray streaking through her black hair and deep lines around her eyes from years of staring at screens and calculations. She'd been working on this project for 15 years, ever since the discovery of quantum folding had opened up possibilities that had once been pure science fiction. "Then we're ready," she said. "The question is whether we should do this." The room fell silent. Everyone there understood what she meant. The technology they developed was unprecedented, revolutionary, and completely untested in combat conditions. They'd had success in laboratory settings, even in small-scale field tests. But what they were about to attempt had never been tried before. If it worked, it would change everything. If it failed, Earth's last hope would die with it. "Ma'am," said Lieutenant Colonel Anderson from his position near the door. He was their military liaison, a career officer who'd been read into the project 5 years ago. "We don't have a choice. Conventional weapons won't touch them. Their shields will deflect everything we throw at them. This is the only card we have to play." Chen nodded slowly. "I know, I just wish we had more time to test it, to understand all the variables." "We never have enough time," Anderson replied. "That's the nature of war. You work with what you have and hope it's enough." Chen returned her attention to the holographic display. The schematics showed a network of quantum nodes positioned throughout the solar system, each one connected through entangled particles that allowed for instantaneous communication, regardless of distance. But communication was just the beginning. The real breakthrough was what they'd discovered you could do with quantum entanglement when you scaled it up and added exotic matter into the equation. You could fold space itself. Not in the way the Valdrin did it, punching through into hyperspace for faster-than-light travel. This was different. This was reaching into the quantum foam of reality and pulling 2 distant points together, creating a temporary bridge between locations that should have been separated by millions of miles. They'd tested it with unmanned probes. Objects weighing up to 50 tons had been successfully transported across the system in the blink of an eye. But they'd never tried it with anything alive, never attempted it on the scale they were now proposing, and never under combat conditions. "Activate the grid," Chen said. "Link all nodes and bring the system online. We show them in 32 hours." The team moved with practiced efficiency. Across the solar system, quantum nodes that had been disguised as routine communications satellites began to pulse with energy. The Valdrin's sensors detected the power fluctuations, but dismissed them as the death throes of a primitive civilization burning its resources in a final, futile gesture. They had no idea what was actually being prepared. Commander Thane watched the countdown timer on his console. 24 hours remained. In that time, he drilled his crew relentlessly, running simulation after simulation of the battle plan they'd been given. It was insane. It violated every principle of naval combat that had been established during humanity's short time in space. But then again, they were facing an enemy that could destroy them with contemptuous ease using conventional tactics. Sometimes insanity was all you had left. "Sir," Lieutenant Chen said from her station, "I'm picking up increased activity from the alien fleet. They're repositioning, moving into an attack formation." Thane pulled up the tactical display. The Valdrin ships were indeed shifting, their perfect geometric formation breaking apart into smaller groups that began advancing toward the inner system. They were moving slowly, almost casually, like hunters who knew their prey had nowhere to run. Time to weapons range. At their current speed, 18 hours until they reach effective firing position on our defensive stations. 18 hours. Thane had hoped for more time, but it would have to be enough. He activated his comm system again. "This is Thane to all stations. They're coming early. Accelerate the timeline. We go operational in 16 hours, all personnel to battle stations. This is not a drill." Across the system, alarm klaxons began to sound. Ships that had been docked at stations cast off and took up positions in the defensive grid. Weapons that everyone knew would be useless against Valdrin shields were armed anyway, because you didn't give up the fight just because the odds were impossible. Marines checked their gear and prepared for boarding actions that would probably never come. Medical bays cleared space for casualties. And deep in the quantum research facility, Dr. Chen watched as power levels climbed toward maximum. The nodes were singing now, vibrating at frequencies that made the technicians' teeth ache. Reality itself seemed to shiver around the connection points. "This is going to work," she whispered to herself. "It has to work." 16 hours later, the Valdrin fleet opened fire. Supreme Commander Velthais had given the order without ceremony. The deadline had passed, the humans had maintained their silence, and now it was time to demonstrate the consequences of defiance. He selected a target almost at random, a medium-sized orbital station positioned near the humans' fourth planet. It would serve as an adequate example. "Main batteries," he said calmly. "Full power, destroy the station." The Eternal Glory's primary weapon systems hummed to life. Energy drawn from the ship's quantum reactor flowed through focusing crystals that had been grown in zero-gravity forges over the course of decades. The weapon itself was a marvel of engineering, capable of delivering enough concentrated energy to crack a planet's crust. Against a simple orbital station, it was like using a sledgehammer to crush an insect. The beam lanced out, crossing the distance in seconds. It struck the station's shields, overwhelmed them instantly, and punched through the hull in a burst of vaporized metal and atmosphere. Secondary explosions rippled across the structure as power systems overloaded and fuel reserves ignited. Within 30 seconds, the station was an expanding cloud of debris. Velthais waited for the humans' response. Surely now they would understand. Surely now they would. His tactical display lit up with warning indicators. "Sir, energy spike detected throughout the human defensive grid. Massive power readings from—" The officer's voice rose in pitch. "Sir, they're everywhere." Velthais stared at the display in confusion. The human ships, which had been scattered across the system in predictable defensive positions, were suddenly appearing next to his fleet. Not flying toward them, not emerging from hyperspace, simply appearing as if they'd been teleported across millions of miles in an instant. "Impossible," he breathed. But impossible or not, it was happening. Human ships materialized next to Valdrin cruisers and opened fire at point-blank range. The shields that would have effortlessly deflected attacks from long distance suddenly found themselves dealing with weapons firing from just a few hundred meters away. And at those ranges, even primitive kinetic weapons could penetrate. Thane felt the lurch in his stomach as the quantum fold released and his station snapped back into normal space. One moment they'd been orbiting Mars. The next, They were directly alongside a Valdrin cruiser that was 3 times their size. "All weapons fire," he shouted. The defense station wasn't built for mobility, but it was bristling with railguns and missile tubes. At this range, they couldn't miss. Magnetically accelerated slugs moving at a significant fraction of light speed slammed into the Valdrin ship's shields. The first few shattered against the energy barrier, but the sheer volume of fire began to overwhelm the defensive systems. Missiles followed, their warheads detonating in rapid succession. The Valdrin cruiser's shields collapsed. "Keep firing," Thane ordered. "Pour everything into them." The railguns continued their relentless barrage. Without shields, the Valdrin hull was tough but not invincible. Slugs punched through armor plating, tearing into internal systems. A lucky shot struck something critical, and the cruiser's rear section erupted in a massive explosion that sent the ship tumbling out of control. All across the battlefield, the same scene repeated. Human ships and stations that had been scattered across the solar system were now engaging the Valdrin fleet at suicidal close range, and the aliens' technological advantage meant nothing when there was no distance to protect them. Supreme Commander Velthais gripped his command throne as the eternal glory shuddered under impacts. His shields were holding, but barely, and the volume of fire coming from 3 different human vessels that had appeared around him was staggering. They were firing crude projectile weapons, simple chunks of metal accelerated by electromagnetic force, but there were so many of them that his defensive systems couldn't intercept them all. "Return fire," he commanded. "All ships engage at close range." But the Valdrin weren't designed for this kind of combat. Their tactics relied on standing off at a distance and using their superior weapons to pick apart enemy formations. Their crews were trained for precision strikes and calculated maneuvers. They'd never faced an enemy that could simply appear next to them and start shooting. The human strategy was brutally simple and devastatingly effective. They'd jump in, unleash everything they had, then jump away before the Valdrin could coordinate a response. They were using the quantum fold technology not for mobility in the traditional sense, but as a weapon itself, turning the battlefield into chaos where the Valdrin's superior organization meant nothing. "Sir, we've lost 17 ships," Velthais' second officer reported, his voice tight with disbelief. "Damage reports coming in from 40 more. They're tearing us apart." Velthais stared at the tactical display, watching his perfectly organized fleet dissolve into scattered groups trying desperately to track enemies that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. The humans were primitives. They weren't supposed to have technology like this. They weren't supposed to fight like this. "All ships," he said, his voice steady despite the fury building inside him. "Retreat to fallback position. Reform the fleet at maximum distance. We need to reassess." It was the first time in the Valdrin Imperium's 300-year history that one of their fleets had ordered a retreat. As the alien ships began to pull back, Thane allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. They'd bloodied the enemy's nose. They'd proven that humanity wasn't going to roll over and die. But he also knew this was just the opening round. The Valdrin would adapt. They'd come back with new tactics, and the quantum fold network had limits. Each jump consumed enormous amounts of power, and they could only maintain it for so long before the nodes burned out. "Recall all ships to defensive positions," he ordered. "Get me casualty reports and damage assessments. And someone get me a line to Dr. Chen. We need to know how many more jumps the system can handle." The answer, when it came, wasn't encouraging. The quantum fold network had performed beyond expectations, but it was already showing signs of strain. They had maybe 3 or 4 more large-scale jumps before the exotic matter in the nodes degraded to the point where the system would become unstable. 3 or 4 more chances to surprise the enemy. After that, they'd be fighting on conventional terms, and conventional terms meant certain defeat. But they'd bought time. They'd shown the Valdrin that humanity was more than just another primitive species waiting to be conquered. And sometimes, Thane thought as he watched the alien fleet regroup in the distance, that was enough to change everything. Supreme Commander Velthais stood in silence, studying the damage reports that scrolled across his holographic display. 23 ships destroyed outright, 47 more damaged to varying degrees. Nearly 6,000 Valdrin warriors dead in less than an hour of combat. It was catastrophic. It was humiliating. It was impossible. And yet it had happened. "Analysis," he said quietly to his science officer. "How are they doing this?" The science officer, a veteran named Kethris who had served the Imperium for 40 years, manipulated the display to show sensor readings from the battle. The humans appear to be using a form of instantaneous translocation. Our sensors detect massive quantum fluctuations at the origin and destination points, but no hyperspace signature. They're not traveling through any dimension we recognize. They're simply moving from one place to another. That's not possible, Velthai said. Instantaneous translocation requires exotic matter in quantities that would destabilize. That's what the equations say, yes, Kethris interrupted carefully. But the humans have somehow done it. My best hypothesis is that they're using quantum entanglement on a macroscopic scale, creating temporary bridges through folded space. Velthais turned to face his science officer fully. If they have that technology, why have they remained confined to a single star system? Why aren't they expanding across the galaxy? Perhaps they've only recently developed it. Or perhaps the power requirements are so massive that it can only function within their home system where they have the infrastructure to support it. Kethris paused. There's another possibility, sir. They might have been hiding their capabilities, waiting for a threat that would force them to reveal their full potential. The thought made Velthais's blood run cold. If the humans had been deliberately concealing advanced technology, that suggested a level of strategic thinking that contradicted everything in the intelligence reports. The Valdren had encountered hundreds of species during their expansion across the galaxy. Some had been aggressive, some passive, some had even welcomed annexation into the Imperium. But none had laid a trap quite like this. We need more data, Velthai said. Dispatch reconnaissance drones, fast movers only. I want detailed scans of their defensive grid, their power generation facilities, everything. If this quantum jumping has limitations, we'll find them. The reconnaissance mission launched within the hour. Small, fast drones equipped with powerful sensors accelerated toward the inner system, their sophisticated stealth systems making them nearly invisible to primitive detection methods. The Valdren had used this tactic successfully on countless worlds. The drones would gather intelligence, transmit it back to the fleet, and give the commanders a complete picture of the enemy's capabilities. But the Valdren had never encountered humans before. Lieutenant Chen saw the drones on her display 30 seconds after they launched. The quantum network that allowed for instantaneous translocation had a side benefit that Dr. Chen's team had only discovered during testing. It made human sensors far more sensitive than they should have been. The entangled particles that formed the network's backbone could detect quantum fluctuations across vast distances, and anything moving through space left a quantum signature. Sir, I'm tracking multiple fast movers inbound from the alien fleet. Small signatures, probably reconnaissance drones. They're using some kind of stealth technology. I only see them because of the quantum sensors. Thane considered this. The Valdren wanted information. That meant they were uncertain, maybe even worried. Good, fear was a weapon too. Don't engage, he said. Let them look, let them see what we want them to see. Chen looked at him in surprise. Sir, the quantum network is our ace, but it's not our only trick. Let their drones scan the defensive stations, the power facilities, all the obvious targets. Meanwhile, make sure they don't detect the real surprises we've been preparing. Over the next 6 hours, the Valdren drones performed a comprehensive scan of humanity's solar system. They mapped every defensive installation, every ship, every orbital platform. They analyzed power outputs and communication patterns. They recorded weapons placements and shield frequencies. When they returned to the fleet, they carried terabytes of data that the Valdren science teams began processing immediately. What they found was encouraging. The humans' quantum translocation network was impressive, but it appeared to have severe limitations. The power requirements were enormous, drawing on nearly every reactor in the system. More importantly, the network seemed to rely on fixed nodes positioned at key points. Destroy those nodes, and the humans would lose their ability to jump around the battlefield. They've shown us their weakness, Velthai said, studying the analysis. The nodes are their vulnerable point. If we target them first, their entire defensive strategy collapses. His second officer nodded. Shall I prepare an attack plan? Yes, but we do this properly. No more underestimating them. We'll split our fleet into 3 groups. The first will engage their outer defenses and draw their attention. The second will use precision strikes to destroy the quantum nodes. The third will remain in reserve to exploit whatever opportunities arise. We'll show these humans what it means to fight a real military power. The plan was sound. The tactics were proven. The Valdrin fleet had executed similar strategies on dozens of worlds with perfect success. There was no reason to think this time would be any different. But Velthais had made two crucial errors. First, he'd assumed that the quantum nodes were the only advanced technology humanity possessed. Second, he'd failed to consider that humans might be capable of learning from their mistakes just as quickly as the Valdrin were. Dr. Chen stood in the command center, watching as the Valdrin fleet began to maneuver for their second attack. She could read their intentions from the formation changes. They were going to target the nodes. It's what she would have done in their position. "How long until they're in position?" she asked. 2 hours, maybe less, replied Colonel Anderson. "They're moving more carefully this time, maintaining defensive formations. They've learned their lesson about getting too close." Chen smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Good, we were counting on them being smart. Activate Protocol Shepard." Anderson raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? We only get one shot at this." "I'm sure. If they destroy the quantum nodes, we lose our mobility advantage anyway. Better to use it while we can." Protocol Shepard had been Dr. Chen's idea, developed during the frantic planning sessions after the first battle. The quantum translocation network could move ships and stations around the battlefield, but it could also move other things. Smaller things. Things that wouldn't be immediately obvious to sensors looking for massive power signatures and hull plating. Things like asteroids. Humanity had been mining the asteroid belt for decades, extracting raw materials to build orbital infrastructure and support the growing colonies. The mining operations had hollowed out hundreds of asteroids, some of them kilometers across. Those hollow spaces had been filled with something new, fusion bombs. Lots of fusion bombs. Each asteroid was now essentially a massive mine floating in space, and the quantum network could put them anywhere in the solar system instantly. "Executing Protocol Shepard," Chen said. "May God forgive us for what we're about to do." The Valdrin fleet advanced in perfect formation, their shields at maximum power, their weapons charged and ready. They'd identified the locations of 17 quantum nodes and assigned strike teams to each one. The attacks would be simultaneous and overwhelming. The humans wouldn't have time to react. Velthais watched the tactical display with satisfaction. This was proper warfare, executed with precision and discipline. The humans had gotten lucky in the first battle with their surprise tactic, but warfare was about more than single tricks. It was about sustained pressure, superior coordination, and the will to see a campaign through to its conclusion. "All strike teams report ready status," he ordered. One by one, the confirmations came in. Each team was in position, weapons locked on their assigned targets. All they needed was the command to fire. "Execute," Velthais said. Energy beams lanced out across space, converging on the quantum nodes. The humans had tried to defend them with shield generators, but Valdrin weapons were designed to crack planetary defenses. The shields lasted perhaps 3 seconds before collapsing. The nodes themselves lasted even less time. Within 90 seconds, all 17 nodes had been destroyed. "Confirmed," the tactical officer reported. "All primary targets eliminated. The quantum network should be." He stopped. His face went pale, which was quite a feat for a Valdrin, whose silver skin didn't normally show much color change. "Sir," he said slowly, "we have multiple contacts, very large contacts, appearing throughout our formation." Velthais looked at his display and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Pure, visceral terror. Asteroids, dozens of them, each one massive enough to be visible on the tactical plot, and each one appearing directly in the middle of his fleet. Not moving, not attacking, just appearing like monuments to humanity's spite, and then the first asteroid detonated. The explosion was unlike anything the Valdrin had ever encountered. The fusion bombs inside the hollowed-out rock didn't just explode outward. They were designed to channel their energy, to focus the blast, turning the asteroid itself into shrapnel that expanded at relativistic speeds. The Valdrin ships closest to the detonation simply ceased to exist, vaporized by temperatures that matched the interior of a star. Ships farther away were torn apart by debris moving fast enough to punch through shields and armor like they weren't even there. And then the second asteroid exploded, and the third, and the fourth. The carefully organized Valdrin fleet dissolved into chaos. Ships tried to break formation, to escape the expanding spheres of destruction, but there was nowhere to go. The asteroids had been placed with mathematical precision, their blast radii overlapping to ensure maximum coverage. It was the most devastating single attack in the history of Valdran military operations. Commander Thane watched from his observation deck as the Valdran fleet died. He felt no joy in it. War was never something to celebrate, no matter how justified. But he felt a grim satisfaction in knowing that humanity had proven, once again, that being underestimated was sometimes the greatest advantage of all. "Get me casualty reports," he said quietly. "Both sides." The reports took time to compile. The Valdran losses were catastrophic. 214 ships destroyed, another 100 damaged beyond combat capability. Nearly 80,000 alien warriors dead in less than 10 minutes. It was genocide on a scale that made even hardened military officers feel sick. But humanity hadn't escaped unscathed. The destruction of the quantum nodes had killed hundreds of technicians and engineers who'd been manning the installations. 3 orbital stations had been caught in the blast radius of the asteroids, and the quantum network itself was gone, shattered beyond repair. They'd used their advantage, and now it was burned out. "We've hurt them badly," Thane said to his assembled officers. "But this isn't over. They still have ships out there, they still have weapons, and now they're going to be angry." He was right. In the remnants of the Valdran fleet, Supreme Commander Velthais sat in his command throne and stared at the casualty reports with eyes that had gone dead and cold. He'd lost over half his fleet to an enemy he'd thought was primitive. He'd watched thousands of warriors, trained for decades, obliterated in moments by weapons made from rocks and fusion bombs. The humans had done something no species had ever done before. They'd made the Valdran Imperium bleed. "Orders, sir?" his second officer asked quietly. Velthais didn't answer immediately. He was thinking, processing, recalculating. The humans were more dangerous than any species the Imperium had encountered. They were clever. They were ruthless. They used their apparent weakness as a weapon, luring enemies into underestimating them and then striking with overwhelming force. But they weren't invincible. The quantum network was gone. The asteroids were spent. Whatever other tricks they had prepared, they would eventually run out. And the Valdran still had nearly 200 ships, still had superior technology, still had weapons that could crack planets. "Send a message to Imperial Command," Velthais said. "Tell them we need reinforcements. Tell them this system is not what we expected. Tell them," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Tell them that humanity is dangerous, perhaps more dangerous than anything we've faced before." "And our immediate actions, sir?" Velthais stood from his command throne. "We regroup. We repair what can be repaired. We study what the humans have shown us and prepare for their next trick, because there will be a next trick. They've proven that much." He walked to the observation window and looked out at the wreckage floating in space. Pieces of Valdran ships tumbled slowly, catching the light of the distant sun. It looked almost beautiful, in a terrible sort of way. "And then," he said softly, "we show them that clever tricks only work for so long. Eventually, you run out of surprises, and when that happens, overwhelming force is all that matters." On Earth, President Chen addressed the planet in a broadcast that reached every screen, every radio, every communication device. Her words were careful, measured, designed to sound hopeful without promising victory. "Today, humanity proved that we will not go quietly into extinction. We've shown an arrogant enemy that underestimating us is a fatal mistake. We've bought ourselves time, time to prepare, time to plan, time to show the galaxy that Earth stands strong." But in the private briefing rooms afterward, the mood was far less optimistic. General Martinez laid out the situation with brutal honesty. "We've used our best weapons. The quantum network is gone. The asteroid mines are spent. We have conventional forces left, but they won't stop a Valdran assault. They'll adapt to our tactics. They'll bring more ships. And eventually they'll overwhelm us through sheer numbers and superior technology." "So what do we do?" someone asked. Dr. Chen spoke up from her position at the back of the room. "We do what humans have always done when faced with impossible odds. We improvise, we adapt, we find a way." She pulled up a holographic display showing strange equations and diagrams. "I have an idea. It's desperate, it's probably insane, but it might just work." "What kind of idea?" General Martinez asked. Chen smiled. It was a tired smile, but there was determination behind it. "The kind that makes use of humanity's real superpower, not our technology, not our weapons, our ability to think differently. to see solutions where others see only problems, to turn every disadvantage into an advantage. She manipulated the display, showing a three-dimensional model of the solar system with new elements overlaid on it. The Valdren think in terms of ships and weapons and conventional warfare, so we're going to give them something completely unconventional, something that uses physics in ways they've never considered, something that turns their own strengths against them. "Can you be more specific?" the president asked. "Not yet. I need time to work out the details. But I can tell you this, if it works, the Valdren are going to wish they'd never heard of humanity." In the wreckage of the Valdren fleet, repair crews worked frantically to restore damaged systems. Medical teams dealt with the casualties as best they could. Officers tried to maintain order and discipline among crews who were shaken by losses they'd never imagined possible. And Supreme Commander Velthai stood alone in his quarters, staring at a holographic display showing the emblem of the Valdren Imperium. A stylized star surrounded by 47 smaller stars, each representing a conquered system. He thought about adding a 48th star, about the speech he would give when Earth fell and humanity joined the long list of species that had bent the knee to Valdren power. It should have been a moment of triumph. It should have been inevitable. But as he looked at the emblem, all he could think about were the burning ships and the screaming voices on the communication channels, and the terrible, stunning realization that for the first time in 300 years, the Valdren Imperium was in a real fight. "Computer," he said quietly, "pull up all available data on human history, military conflicts, technological development, cultural patterns, everything." "That will be extensive, Commander. Human records cover approximately 12,000 years of civilization." "I don't care, start the compilation. I want to understand these creatures. I want to know what makes them think the way they do, what makes them fight the way they do." "Analysis will take several days." "Then you'd better start now," Velthai said, "because something tells me we're going to need every advantage we can get." He was more right than he knew. Because 3 miles beneath the Colorado Rockies, Dr. Sarah Chen was already putting her new plan into motion, and it was going to change everything. Dr. Chen hadn't slept in 48 hours. She stood in front of a holographic display that showed mathematical equations dense enough to give most people a headache just looking at them. But her eyes were bright with the kind of manic energy that came from being exhausted and terrified and brilliant all at once. "You want to do what?" General Martinez asked, staring at the display with an expression that suggested he wasn't sure whether to be impressed or concerned about Chen's mental state. "I want to turn the sun into a weapon," Chen said simply. The room fell silent. Even Colonel Anderson, who'd worked with Chen long enough to expect the unexpected, looked shocked. Martinez searched for words. "That's insane." "Yes," Chen agreed. "It absolutely is. It's also our best option." She manipulated the holographic display, zooming out to show the entire solar system. "The Valdren have superior technology in almost every way. Better shields, better weapons, better ships. We can't beat them in a conventional fight, and we've already used up our surprise tactics, so we need to think bigger, much bigger." "By weaponizing a star," Martinez said flatly. "Not weaponizing exactly, more like redirecting." Chen pulled up a new set of calculations. "The sun constantly releases enormous amounts of energy in all directions: solar wind, radiation, electromagnetic energy. Most of it just dissipates into space. But what if we could focus it, direct it like a beam?" President Chen, who'd been listening quietly from her position near the door, spoke up. "Is that even possible?" "It shouldn't be," Dr. Chen admitted. "The energy scales involved are astronomical, literally. But we've already done the impossible twice, first with the quantum translocation network, then with the asteroid mines. This would be a third miracle, maybe our last one." She zoomed in on a point near the sun, showing a network of structures that existed only in simulation. "We build a series of magnetic field generators in close solar orbit. Nothing fancy, just massive electromagnetic coils powered by solar energy. We position them in a specific formation and use them to create a focused magnetic tunnel that channels the solar wind." "A tunnel made of magnetic fields," Anderson said slowly, "aimed at the Valdren fleet." "Exactly. The solar wind particles are charged. They'll follow the magnetic field lines. We make the tunnel tight enough and focused enough, and we can direct billions of tons of charged particles at relativistic speeds directly at any target we choose. Martinez leaned back in his chair. How long would it take to build something like this? If we mobilize every construction resource in the system, if we strip every ship and station for components, if we work around the clock with no breaks, Chen paused. 72 hours, maybe less if we get lucky. And if the Valdrin attack before we're finished? Chen's expression went hard. Then we die, but that's going to happen anyway if we don't try. President Chen looked around the room, reading the faces of her advisors. She saw doubt, fear, exhaustion, but she also saw determination. Humans had always been at their best when backed into a corner. Do it, she said. Mobilize everything we have. If Dr. Chen says she can turn the sun into a weapon, then we're going to let her try. The next 72 hours were a blur of frantic activity that pushed humanity's industrial capacity to its absolute limit. Every ship capable of carrying cargo was drafted into service. Every engineer and technician who understood magnetic field theory was pulled from their regular duties. Even civilian volunteers were recruited to help with the construction effort. The magnetic field generators themselves were stripped-down affairs, nothing but massive coils of superconducting cable wrapped around frameworks that would barely survive the extreme conditions of close solar orbit. Under normal circumstances, designing and building such structures would take years. Humanity built them in 3 days. Commander Thane watched the construction from his position on the orbital defense station, now repositioned closer to Earth as part of the defensive fallback. The amount of activity was staggering. Ships moved in constant streams between the construction sites and the resource depots. Welding torches lit up the darkness of space like fireflies. It looked chaotic, but there was a desperate efficiency to it all. Do you think it'll work? Lieutenant Chen asked quietly. I have no idea, Thane admitted. I barely understand what Dr. Chen is trying to do, but I know we're out of options, so yeah, I hope it works. I hope it works like hell. At the same time, in the wreckage of the Valdrin fleet, Supreme Commander Velthize was conducting his own analysis. His science teams had been studying the human tactics, trying to understand the principles behind the quantum translocation and the asteroid mines. What they'd found was disturbing. The humans are more advanced than we thought, Kethris reported. Not in terms of basic technology, but in terms of theoretical physics. They understand quantum mechanics at a level that rivals our own scientists, possibly exceeds it in certain areas. How is that possible? Velthize demanded. They're a young species, they've barely left their home world. That's what makes it remarkable, sir. They've achieved in decades what took us centuries. My theory is that their rapid technological advancement is driven by necessity and desperation. They're a fractious species, constantly fighting amongst themselves, and that conflict has forced them to innovate at an accelerated pace. Velthize considered this. The Valdrin had achieved peace and unity thousands of years ago. Their society was stable, ordered, efficient. But perhaps that same stability had made them complacent. Perhaps they'd forgotten what it meant to fight for survival against impossible odds. What are they building? He asked, pulling up sensor readings that showed the intense activity near the human star. Unknown, sir. The structures appear to be some kind of magnetic field generators, but the scale is massive, far beyond anything needed for normal operations. Recommendations. Kethris hesitated. Sir, I believe we should withdraw, request reinforcements from Imperial Command, return with overwhelming force. Withdrawal would take weeks. By the time we return, the humans could have fortified their position even further. With respect, sir, every engagement with this species has resulted in unexpected losses. They're unpredictable. They use tactics we've never encountered. I believe caution is warranted. Velthize wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Kethris was right. The smart move was to pull back, regroup, come back with a force so large that no amount of human cleverness could defeat it. But Velthize also understood what withdrawal would mean for his career, his reputation, his standing in the Imperium. A commander who lost half his fleet and then retreated from a pre-spacefaring species would never live down the shame. We'll compromise, he said finally. We maintain our current position, but we stay at maximum alert. If the humans make any aggressive moves, we're prepared to respond. Meanwhile, I want constant surveillance of whatever they're building near their star. The moment we understand what they're planning, we strike first. It was a reasonable decision, a cautious decision, and it would prove to be exactly the wrong decision. The magnetic field generators went online 68 hours after construction began, 4 hours ahead of schedule. Dr. Chen watched from her control center as the massive coils powered up, their superconducting cables generating magnetic fields strong enough to bend the trajectory of solar wind particles. Field generators 1 through 12 are online and stable, reported one of her technicians. Fields are holding steady, no fluctuations detected. Chen allowed herself a small breath of relief. The generators were working. Now came the hard part. Activate the focusing array. Gradually, let's not blow everything up on our first try. The focusing array was a second ring of magnetic field generators positioned further from the sun. Their job was to take the redirected solar wind and compress it, tightening the beam until it was focused enough to be useful as a weapon. The theory was sound. The practice was something they were inventing as they went along. Array is activating, field compression beginning. We're getting particle density increases. Velocity is holding steady at 0.15 c. 1.5% of light speed. Not relativistic exactly, but close enough. And more importantly, they were dealing with an absolutely massive volume of particles. The solar wind carried away roughly 1 million tons of matter from the sun every second. If they could focus even a fraction of that into a tight beam, the kinetic energy involved would be staggering. Compression ratio increasing. We're at 10 to 1, 20 to 1, 30 to 1. Chen watched the readings carefully. The magnetic bottle they were creating was holding, but barely. Any instability would cause the whole system to collapse. 40 to 1, 50 to 1. We're approaching maximum theoretical compression. Hold it there, Chen ordered. Lock in the field parameters. Now let's see if we can aim this thing. The focusing array could be rotated, changing the direction of the concentrated solar wind beam. Chen had designed it with multiple redundant control systems, because the last thing they needed was to lose control of a weapon this powerful. Targeting systems are online. We have full directional control. Range is. The technician paused, double-checking the numbers. Effectively unlimited. As long as we can maintain the magnetic focus, the beam will hold coherence across the entire system. Chen smiled. It was a weary, triumphant smile. Then let's show the Valdrin what happens when you threaten humanity in our own solar system. Supreme Commander Velthies received the first warning from his sensors 60 seconds before the beam hit. His science officer's voice rose in alarm. Sir, massive energy spike detected from the human star, charged particle density increasing exponentially. They're directing the solar wind at us. Velthies stared at his display in disbelief. That's impossible. You can't control stellar phenomena on that scale. They're doing it anyway, sir. Impact in 40 seconds. All ships maximum shields, evasive maneuvers. But there was no evading this. The focused solar wind beam was hundreds of kilometers wide and moving at nearly 15,000 kilometers per second. The Valdrin ships could no more dodge it than they could dodge the sun itself. The beam struck. Shields that were designed to deflect energy weapons and kinetic projectiles suddenly found themselves dealing with an entirely different threat. A continuous stream of charged particles moving at relativistic speeds, backed by the full power of a star. The shields held for perhaps 3 seconds before the sheer volume of particles overwhelmed them. And then the solar wind reached the hulls. Valdrin ships were tough, built to withstand the hazards of deep space. But they weren't built to survive being sandblasted by billions of tons of particles moving at a significant fraction of light speed. Hull plating, designed to handle the occasional micrometeorite impact, began to erode. Electronic systems, shielded against normal radiation, started failing as the particle flux simply overwhelmed their protection. Ships tried to turn away to present their heavily armored frontal sections to the beam, but it didn't matter. The solar wind found every crack, every seam, every weak point. It was like trying to hide from a hurricane. Commander Thane watched through his telescopes as the Valdrin fleet was slowly torn apart by the focused solar wind. It wasn't a quick death like the asteroid mines had provided. This was slower, more methodical, like watching a mountain being worn down by wind and rain, except compressed into minutes instead of millennia. "They're breaking formation," Lieutenant Chen reported. Multiple ships attempting to flee the system. Let them go, Thane said. We've made our point. But Dr. Chen had other ideas. From her control center, she manipulated the focusing array, adjusting the beam's direction to track the fleeing ships. The solar wind followed them like a spotlight, relentlessly wearing away their shields and armor no matter how fast they ran. Dr. Chen, President Chen said over the communication channel, you can stop now, they're retreating. With respect, Madam President, no. Dr. Chen's voice was cold, professional, absolutely devoid of mercy. They came to our system to exterminate us, to turn us into slaves. We don't stop until every single ship is disabled or destroyed. We don't stop until they understand, completely and totally, that humanity is not prey. In the end, 37 Valdran ships managed to limp away from the solar system, their hulls scarred and pitted, their shields burned out, their crews traumatized. The rest were hulks drifting dead in space, their systems too damaged to function. Supreme Commander Velthais survived, though he almost wished he hadn't. He sat in the emergency command center of his flagship, surrounded by damage reports and casualty lists, and tried to comprehend how thoroughly he'd been defeated. Prepare a message to Imperial Command, he said quietly. Tell them everything. Tell them that the humans are not a primitive species. Tell them that this system cannot be taken with conventional forces. Tell them, he paused, struggling with the words. Tell them that we have encountered a species that fights like nothing we've seen before, a species that turns physics itself into a weapon, a species that refuses to accept defeat even when facing certain death. What should we do, sir? His second officer asked. Velthais looked at him with eyes that had seen too much death in too short a time. We run, we leave this cursed system, and we don't come back unless we have a fleet 10 times this size. The humans have beaten us. Completely. Totally. We're done. The retreat of the Valdran fleet was broadcast across every human communication network. People in cities across Earth stood in the streets and watched the displays showing the alien ships fleeing. Some cheered. Some cried. Most just stood in silent disbelief that they were still alive. President Chen addressed the world again, her voice steadier now, carrying a note of hope that had been absent before. Today, humanity has achieved the impossible. We faced an enemy that had conquered dozens of worlds, and we sent them running. We did this not through superior numbers or advanced technology, but through courage, creativity, and an absolute refusal to surrender. We have shown the galaxy that Earth is not defenseless, that humanity is not weak, that we will fight with every weapon at our disposal, and we will invent new weapons if we have to. She paused, letting her words sink in. But we have also learned something important. We are not alone in the universe. There are other species out there, other civilizations, and not all of them are friendly. The Valdran will return. Others may come. We must be ready. We must continue to innovate, to prepare, to stand united against any threat. Starting today, we begin a new era for humanity. An era where we look outward to the stars not with fear, but with determination. An era where we take our place among the galactic community not as victims or vassals, but as equals. An era where the name Earth carries weight across the cosmos. In the ruins of the Valdran fleet, the survivors began the long journey home, carrying with them a message that would change the entire galaxy's perception of humanity. The Valdran Imperium had been stopped, defeated, humiliated by a species that had no business surviving, let alone winning. And in command centers and throne rooms across 1,000 worlds, other civilizations heard the news and began to ask themselves a question they'd never considered before. What else could the humans do? The Valdran retreat should have been the end of it. A defeated enemy limping away, carrying stories of humanity's unexpected strength. But the galaxy, Commander Thane was learning, didn't work that way. 3 weeks after the battle, long-range sensors detected something that made every military advisor on Earth go pale. The Valdran were coming back, and they weren't alone. Confirmed count is 2,300 vessels, Lieutenant Chen reported, her voice professionally calm despite the numbers she was reading. Multiple fleet signatures. We're identifying Valdran ships, but also configurations we've never seen before. They've brought allies. Thane stared at the tactical display showing the massive fleet gathering at the edge of the solar system. It was larger than anything humanity had imagined possible. The kind of force you assembled not to conquer a single world, but to crush entire star systems. Analysis, he said quietly. The new ships appear to be from at least 4 different species. We're detecting energy signatures consistent with the Mordesh Collective, the Thrax Dominion, and possibly the Kelvar Trade Consortium. The fourth group is unknown. They called in favors, General Martinez said from his position at the strategic overview. The Valdren went back to the Imperium and said they needed help, and apparently other species decided that humanity needed to be dealt with. President Chen looked grim. Why would other species care about us? We've never even left our solar system. Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd been quietly studying the sensor data, spoke up. Because we scared them. We defeated a major military power using weapons they'd never seen before. From their perspective, we're a completely unknown variable, unpredictable, potentially dangerous. Better to crush us now before we become a real threat. So we're being hit with a preemptive strike, Thane said. They're not coming to conquer us, they're coming to eliminate us. The room fell silent as everyone processed that reality. The quantum network was gone. The asteroid mines were spent. The solar wind weapon was powerful but had limitations, and now they were facing a fleet that outnumbered their first opponents by a factor of 10. Options, President Chen asked. We could try to negotiate, suggested the Secretary of State, a career diplomat named Richardson who'd been arguing for peaceful contact since the crisis began. Maybe if we explain that we're not a threat, that we only want to be left alone. They don't care, Dr. Chen interrupted. Look at that fleet. You don't assemble 2,000 ships because you want to talk. They've already decided what they're going to do. We can either fight or surrender. There is no third option. Then we fight, President Chen said firmly. Dr. Chen, what do we have left? Any tricks? Any surprises? Sarah Chen pulled up a holographic display showing various schematics and calculations. Maybe. The solar wind weapon worked better than expected. We've been studying the data, and I think we can improve it, make it more focused, more powerful. But it's still just one weapon, and there's a limit to how many targets we can engage at once. What about the quantum research? Colonel Anderson asked. The translocation network is gone, but we learned a lot building it. Can we use that knowledge somehow? Chen's eyes lit up. Actually, yes, maybe. I'll need time to work out the details, but there might be something we can do with quantum entanglement that doesn't require the massive infrastructure of the full network. Something smaller scale, but still useful. How much time do you need? Thane asked. 48 hours, maybe less if I cut corners. You have 24, President Chen said. Because I'm guessing that fleet isn't going to wait around giving us time to prepare. They're going to hit us hard and fast. She was right. 18 hours later, the alien armada began its final approach. The fleet that entered humanity's solar system was a sight that would have made any military strategist weep with despair. 2,300 ships moving in perfect coordination, their formation so precise it looked like a living thing. At the center flew the Valdren vessels, now reinforced with heavy cruisers and dreadnoughts that made their previous fleet look like a scouting party. Flanking them were the blocky, utilitarian ships of the Mordesh Collective, a species known for their practical approach to warfare. On the outer edges, the sleek hunters of the Thrax Dominion prowled like predators. And at the very back, moving with ponderous grace, was something that made even seasoned observers pause. A Kelvar Merchant Prince flagship, a vessel that was part warship and part mobile city, bristling with weapons platforms that represented technologies from a dozen different civilizations. Supreme Commander Velthai stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the Infinite Justice, and felt a grim satisfaction. This time there would be no surprises. This time, humanity would learn what it meant to challenge the established powers of the galaxy. All ships advance to attack positions, he ordered. Target every orbital installation, every ship, every defense platform. I want total saturation fire. Nothing survives. The alien fleet spread out, surrounding Earth's orbital space in a sphere of steel and energy. Weapons that could glass planets charged to full power. Shield systems that had weathered battles across the galaxy hummed with readiness. On Earth, sirens wailed in every city. Families huddled in underground shelters built during the initial crisis. Soldiers manned defensive positions that everyone knew were utterly inadequate. And in orbit, every human ship and station prepared for what would likely be their final battle. Commander Thane gave his crew one last speech. He kept it short because there wasn't much to say that they didn't already know. Today we're going to die, There's no point pretending otherwise. That fleet out there could destroy us 100 times over. But here's the thing, they expect us to be afraid. They expect us to beg or surrender or break. So we're not going to do any of those things. We're going to fight. We're going to make them pay for every inch of space they take. And maybe, just maybe, we're going to survive long enough for Dr. Chen's miracle to save us all. He looked around at the faces of his crew. Young people who'd signed up to protect their home, never expecting to face a threat like this. "It's been an honor serving with you," he said simply. The alien fleet opened fire. The opening barrage was designed to be overwhelming, to break the human defensive line in the first 30 seconds. Thousands of energy beams lanced through space, converging on the orbital stations and defensive platforms. Missiles followed, their warheads bright against the darkness. And then something impossible happened. The human defenses held. Not all of them. 3 stations were destroyed in the initial attack, their shields overwhelmed despite their best efforts. 24 ships were crippled or destroyed, but the rest survived, protected by shield systems that shouldn't have been able to withstand the assault. In his command center, Supreme Commander Velthais stared at the tactical display in confusion. "How are their shields holding?" he demanded. "Those are primitive force fields. They shouldn't be able to stop our weapons." "Sir," his science officer Kethris said slowly, "they're not stopping our weapons, they're redirecting them." "Explain." Kethris pulled up a detailed scan of the human shields. "The energy from our beams isn't being absorbed or deflected. It's being channeled through some kind of quantum tunneling effect. The energy enters the shield at one point and exits at another. They're essentially turning our own weapons into a closed loop." Velthais felt a cold chill. They weaponized quantum tunneling, just like they weaponized quantum translocation in stellar phenomena. What else have they weaponized? He got his answer moments later when human ships that should have been easy targets began moving in ways that violated everything he knew about physics. They weren't using conventional engines. They weren't even using the quantum jump system from before. They were somehow moving without moving, appearing at different points in space without crossing the distance between. "They're using quantum uncertainty," Kethris breathed. "They're exploiting the principle that particles don't have definite positions until observed. They're making their ships exist in multiple possible locations simultaneously, and then collapsing the waveform to whichever position is most advantageous." It was impossible, it was insane, it was perfect. Human ships flickered in and out of existence, appearing behind alien vessels to fire point-blank volleys before vanishing again. They were everywhere and nowhere, impossible to target, impossible to predict. The coordinated alien assault dissolved into chaos as commanders tried to track enemies that refused to follow the normal rules of causality. And then Dr. Chen activated her masterpiece. She'd spent the last 24 hours working on something that even her colleagues thought was too dangerous to attempt. The quantum translocation network had required fixed nodes and massive power sources. This new system was different. Instead of creating stable bridges through space, it created unstable ones. Temporary rifts in spacetime that lasted only microseconds but could be generated almost anywhere. She called it quantum fragmentation, and it turned the battlefield into a nightmare. The first alien cruiser hit by the system simply came apart. One moment it was a solid vessel. The next, pieces of it existed in different quantum states, scattered across multiple possible timelines. The ship didn't explode. It didn't burn. It just stopped being a coherent object, its atoms spread across probability space in a way that would take months to even begin to understand. "What did they just do?" demanded the Mordesh fleet commander, watching as 3 more of his ships suffered the same fate. "What weapon is that?" Nobody could answer, because humanity had done something no other species had even considered. They'd turned quantum mechanics itself into a weapon, exploiting the fuzzy boundary between possibility and reality to unmake their enemies at the most fundamental level. The alien fleet began to break, not retreating exactly, but losing cohesion as individual commanders made their own decisions about whether this fight was worth continuing. The Thrax ships were the first to pull back, their hunting instincts telling them that this prey was too dangerous. The Kelvar merchant prince, calculating the cost-benefit analysis of continued combat, decided that no contract was worth this level of casualties. But the Valdrin and Mordesh remained, driven by pride and military doctrine that said retreats were for lesser species. They pressed the attack, throwing everything they had at Earth's defenses. Commander Thane watched as the alien fleet crumbled around him. His station had taken damage, lost systems and crew, but they were still fighting, still surviving. Against all odds, against an enemy that should have crushed them, humanity was winning. "Sir," Lieutenant Chen said, her voice shaking with something between terror and awe. "We're getting readings from the outer system. The solar wind weapon is activating again, but the power levels are... they're off the scale. Dr. Chen is using every generator in the system to boost the output." Thane pulled up the readings and felt his blood run cold. The focused solar wind beam that had defeated the first Valdran fleet had been powerful. This was something else entirely. This was channeling not just the solar wind, but the full electromagnetic output of the sun itself, focused into a beam that could probably be seen from light years away. "Get me Dr. Chen," he ordered. "Now." Sarah Chen's face appeared on the screen. She looked exhausted, manic, and absolutely terrified of what she was about to do. "Commander Thane, I'm about to fire the enhanced solar weapon at full power. It's going to target every hostile ship in the system simultaneously using quantum-entangled targeting systems. The beam won't be continuous. It will pulse, splitting itself across multiple quantum states to hit all targets at once." "Will it work?" Thane asked. "I have no idea. The math says it should. Reality might disagree, but we're out of options, so I'm trying it anyway." "Do it," Thane said. "End this." Dr. Chen took a deep breath, said a quiet prayer to whatever gods might be listening, and activated the weapon. The sun seemed to pulse. For just a moment, its electromagnetic output spiked to levels that would have worried astronomers if they'd been able to measure it properly. That energy was caught, channeled, focused, and split across quantum space in a way that meant a single beam became hundreds of beams, each one targeting a different ship. The alien fleet died, not slowly like before, but in an instant. Ships that had been fighting moments ago simply stopped, their systems burned out by electromagnetic pulses that had been amplified to nightmare levels. Shields meant to protect against weapons couldn't stop what was essentially a direct injection of stellar energy into every critical system simultaneously. 2,000 ships became 2,000 hulks in the span of 3 seconds. Supreme Commander Velthais sat in darkness as his flagship's emergency power struggled to come online. Around him, he could hear the groans of damaged systems and injured crew. His tactical display was dead. His weapons were offline. His shields were gone. He'd lost, again, but this time was worse because he'd brought allies, and now those allies had been humiliated alongside him. The Valdran Imperium's reputation was destroyed. No species would trust them to lead a military campaign ever again. And all because of one stubborn, impossibly clever species that refused to accept that they were supposed to be the victims. "Sir," Kethris said from somewhere in the darkness, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth, audio only." Velthais almost laughed. Of course the humans wanted to gloat, they'd earned it. "Put it through." The voice that filled the command center wasn't gloating. It was calm, professional, and absolutely exhausted. President Chen, speaking not as a conqueror but as someone who was just as tired of war as Velthais was. "Supreme Commander Velthais, your fleet is disabled. Your allies are retreating. This fight is over. You can choose to continue, in which case we will destroy every ship you have, or you can choose peace. Choose to leave our system and never return. Choose to tell the galaxy that Earth is not a target, that humanity is not prey." "And if we return," Velthais found himself asking, "then we'll invent new weapons, new ways to turn physics against you, new nightmares that will make what you've seen today look tame. We are very good at surviving, Commander, and we are very, very good at finding creative solutions to problems." President Chen paused, letting that sink in. "But we don't want to be your enemy. We don't want to fight. We just want to be left alone to live our lives in peace. So I'm offering you a deal. Leave now, spread the word that Earth is off limits, and we'll let you repair your ships and go home. Continue to threaten us, and we'll show you exactly how creative, desperate humans can be." Velthais sat in the darkness and made his decision. "We accept," he said quietly. "You've won, completely, totally. We'll leave your system and we won't return. And I will make sure the entire galaxy knows that humanity is not to be trifled with." "Thank you," President Chen said, and she actually sounded sincere. "I hope your journey home is safe, Commander." The transmission ended. Velthais sat in the darkness for a long moment, then began issuing orders to evacuate the system. Around him, the survivors of the alien fleet began the long, shameful process of retreat. But something had changed in Velthais during that conversation. He'd come to Earth expecting to crush primitives. He'd found something else entirely, a species that was young, inexperienced, and absolutely terrifying in their refusal to quit. A species that would weaponize reality itself rather than surrender. "Kethris," he said quietly, "make a note in my personal log. Today, the Valdran Imperium learned humility. May we be wise enough to remember this lesson." The weeks following the second battle were strange for humanity. They'd won decisively against impossible odds, but victory felt different than anyone had imagined. There was no celebration in the streets, no triumphant parades. Instead, there was a quiet, exhausted relief mixed with the realization that everything had changed forever. Commander Thane stood at the observation deck of his repaired station, watching as the last of the alien hulks were either salvaged or pushed into safe orbits. The salvage teams were finding remarkable technology aboard those ships, systems, and devices that humanity would be studying for decades. But the cost had been high. Nearly 2,000 people had died defending Earth. Thousands more were injured. Entire stations had been destroyed, along with ships that had represented decades of construction effort. "We won," Lieutenant Chen said quietly, standing beside him. "So why does it feel like we lost something?" "Because we did," Thane replied. "We lost our innocence. Before this, we could pretend we were alone in the universe, or that if we weren't alone, we'd meet aliens as friends. Now we know the truth. Space is dangerous. Other species exist, and not all of them are friendly. We can't go back to how things were before." "Is that a bad thing?" Thane considered the question. "I don't know. Ask me in 10 years. On Earth, Dr. Sarah Chen was dealing with the aftermath of her work in a different way. She'd been hailed as a hero, the brilliant scientist who'd saved humanity through her revolutionary weapons. But she couldn't shake the images of those ships coming apart, of the alien crews who died because of her inventions. She turned quantum mechanics into a weapon of mass destruction, and now every government in the world wanted her to build more. "I'm not doing it," she told President Chen during a private meeting in the underground bunker that had served as a command center. "No more weapons. I'm done." The president looked at her with understanding. "You saved our species, Dr. Chen." "I know, and I'd do it again if I had to. But that doesn't mean I want to spend the rest of my life creating new ways to kill people, or aliens, or whatever other threats come along." "What will you do instead?" Chen pulled up a holographic display showing schematics for a very different kind of device. "I want to use quantum entanglement for communication, real-time communication across interstellar distances. If we're going to be part of a galactic community, we need to be able to talk to other species without months or years of signal delay. And maybe, just maybe, if we can talk to each other, we won't always have to fight." President Chen smiled. "I'll approve the funding. But Sarah, you need to understand something. The galaxy knows about us now. They know what we can do. Some species will be frightened of us. Some will want to be our allies, and some will still see us as a threat to be eliminated. We need to be ready for all of those scenarios." "I know, but we don't have to become monsters just because the universe is dangerous. We can be strong without being cruel. We can defend ourselves without turning into the kind of species that attacks first and asks questions later." "Let's hope you're right," the president said. 3 months after the battle, something unexpected happened. The Valdran sent an ambassador. The ship arrived at Earth's defensive perimeter, broadcasting peaceful intentions on all frequencies. It was a small vessel, unarmed, carrying a single passenger and a minimal crew. After extensive scanning and debate, humanity allowed it to approach. The ambassador was Kethris, the science officer who had served under Supreme Commander Velthais. He arrived not with threats or demands, but with what humans would have called an olive branch. "I come representing the Valdran Imperium," he said in his first meeting with Earth's diplomatic corps. "I come with an apology and an offer." "An apology?" General Martinez asked skeptically. "For trying to exterminate us twice?" "Yes, we underestimated you. We treated you as primitives when you were anything but. We came to conquer and found ourselves humbled by a species that understood aspects of reality we'd never fully explored. Supreme Commander Velthais asked me to convey his personal regret for the deaths his actions caused." "Why should we believe this isn't a trick?" President Chen asked. Kethris made a gesture that the human translators interpreted as a sign of sincerity. Because we are afraid of you, truly, deeply afraid. You did something no species has ever done. You defeated a major galactic power using nothing but creativity and desperation. You turned physics itself into a weapon. If you become hostile, if you decide to leave your solar system and start conquering others, there's no telling what you could accomplish. We're not conquerors, President Chen said firmly. We just want to be left alone. I believe you, but the galaxy doesn't work that way. Now that other species know you exist, know what you can do, they'll want to make deals with you. Or neutralize you before you become a threat, or steal your technology. You can't hide in your solar system anymore. Then what are you suggesting? Asked Richardson, the Secretary of State. Kethris pulled up a holographic display showing a map of the local galactic sector. The Valdran Imperium controls 47 systems. We have enemies, species who would destroy us if they could. We're offering you a defensive alliance. We share our conventional technology, our star charts, our knowledge of galactic politics. You share your quantum weapons research. Together, we make each other stronger. The room erupted in debate. Some officials argued this was exactly what humanity needed, allies who understood galactic politics. Others insisted it was a trap, a way for the Valdran to get close enough to steal human technology. The argument went on for hours. Finally, President Chen called for silence. Ambassador Kethris, I need to understand something. Why do you really want this alliance? The truth. Kethris was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of absolute sincerity. Because we're dying. The Valdran Imperium has been expanding for 300 years, conquering world after world. But we've become complacent. Our technology is old. Our tactics are stale. Our civilization is slowly ossifying into irrelevance. When you defeated us, it was the first time in centuries that we'd been truly challenged. You reminded us that there are still things to learn, still ways to grow. We want to ally with you because we need what you have. Innovation, creativity, the ability to see problems from new angles. And in exchange, we offer you what you need. Experience, infrastructure, and protection from the species that will inevitably come looking for you. President Chen studied the alien ambassador carefully. You're asking us to help you become better at war. No, I'm asking you to help us become better at survival. There's a difference. The debate continued for weeks. Dr. Chen was brought in to assess whether sharing quantum weapons technology was safe. Military advisors argued about strategic implications. Diplomats tried to understand the complex web of galactic alliances and enmities. Public opinion was split between those who wanted to embrace the galaxy and those who wanted to remain isolated. In the end, it was Commander Thane who made the most persuasive argument. We can't stay alone forever, he said at a key policy meeting. The galaxy knows we exist now. They know we're dangerous. If we refuse all contact, if we try to hide behind our solar wind weapon and our quantum tricks, we'll just make ourselves a target. But if we engage with the galaxy, if we make allies and establish ourselves as a legitimate power, we have a chance at building something stable, something safe. You're saying we should trust the Valdran? Someone asked. After everything. I'm saying we should trust ourselves. We've proven we can defend our home. Now let's prove we can build a future beyond it. The alliance was approved by a narrow margin. Humanity would share carefully limited information about quantum mechanics with the Valdran in exchange for star charts, diplomatic introductions, and defensive technologies. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even entirely comfortable, but it was a start. 6 months after the second battle, the first human ship left the solar system. It wasn't a warship. It was an exploration vessel named the Discovery, crewed by scientists and diplomats, carrying greetings from Earth to the wider galaxy. Ambassador Kethris traveled with them, serving as a guide and translator. Dr. Sarah Chen watched the launch from Earth's surface, standing beside her wife and children. The quantum communication system she'd built would keep the Discovery in constant contact with Earth, allowing real-time conversations across light years. It was a small miracle, one of many that humanity had achieved in the months since the war. Do you think they'll be safe out there? Her wife asked. I think they'll be as safe as anyone can be, Chen replied. The galaxy is dangerous, but we've proven we can handle danger. We've proven we can adapt, innovate, and survive against impossible odds. That's our real strength. Not the weapons I built, but the refusal to give up even when everything looks hopeless. You sound optimistic. I am. For the first time in months, I actually am. Because we didn't just survive the Valdrin attack. We thrived. We turned our backs against the wall into an advantage, and now we're taking that same spirit out into the galaxy. Across the solar system, humanity was changing. New technologies born from the war were being adapted for peaceful purposes. Quantum entanglement was revolutionizing communication. The understanding of stellar phenomena gained from building the solar wind weapon was leading to breakthroughs in energy generation. The magnetic field manipulation techniques were opening possibilities for terraforming other worlds. Earth was becoming something new, a major player in galactic politics, a source of revolutionary technology, a species that other civilizations watched with a mixture of respect and caution. Supreme Commander Velthais, now semi-retired and serving as a strategic advisor to the Valdrin High Council, watched humanity's emergence with complicated feelings. He'd been humiliated by them, had lost thousands under his command, had seen his reputation destroyed. But he'd also learned something valuable. That arrogance was a weakness, that every species had something to teach, and that sometimes the best outcome of war was finding a way to peace. "They're going to change everything," he told Kethris during one of their regular communication sessions. "You realize that, don't you?" "I do," Kethris replied. "They're going to bring their human perspective to every problem they encounter. They're going to question assumptions that other species have held for millennia. They're going to be frustrating, unpredictable, and occasionally infuriating. And they're going to push the entire galaxy forward because of it." "You sound almost fond of them." "I am. They beat us, Velthais. They beat us twice. But they did it without becoming monsters. They could have destroyed our entire fleet in that last battle. Instead, they let us live, let us retreat with honor. How many species would have shown that restraint?" Velthais didn't answer. He knew Kethris was right. The humans had every reason to be vengeful, to turn their weapons on their enemies without mercy. Instead, they'd chosen a different path. It was a lesson the Valdrin needed to learn. A year after the war, humanity made first contact with a dozen new species. Some were friendly, curious about the young species that had defeated the Valdrin. Others were cautious, worried about what humanity's quantum weapons might mean for the balance of galactic power. A few were hostile, seeing an opportunity to test themselves against the species everyone was talking about. Those hostile encounters ended quickly. Humanity had learned from the Valdrin attack. They'd built defensive stations at the edge of their solar system. They'd improved their weapons, refined their tactics, and most importantly, they'd made allies. The Valdrin defended their new partners against threats, and word spread quickly. Humanity was off limits unless you wanted to fight both the humans and their increasingly powerful friends. Commander Thane, now promoted to Admiral, oversaw the growing defensive network. He'd aged in the past year, his hair going grayer, his face carrying more lines. But there was a satisfaction in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "We did it," Lieutenant Chen said during an inspection tour of one of the new defensive platforms. "We survived. We built something lasting." "We're still building," Thane corrected gently. "This isn't the end of the story, it's just the end of the beginning. There will be more threats, more challenges. The galaxy is a big place and we're still learning how it works. But yeah, I think we're going to be okay." "Why's that?" Thane smiled. "Because we're human, we're stubborn, creative, and absolutely terrible at accepting defeat. The Valdrin learned that the hard way. Anyone else who comes for us will learn it too." On Earth, monuments were built to honor those who died defending their home. Dr. Chen's name was carved into the memorial alongside the soldiers and civilians who'd given their lives. President Chen had objected, saying she was still alive and contributing. But Chen had insisted. "That person who built weapons out of quantum mechanics, who turned the sun into a death ray, who was willing to do anything to survive," she'd said. "That person died when the war ended. I'm someone different now. Someone who gets to use the same knowledge to build instead of destroy. Let the monument remember who I had to be. I'm grateful I don't have to be her anymore." The president had understood and approved the memorial. 5 years after the war, the Discovery returned to Earth carrying representatives from 8 different civilizations. They came to see humanity's home world, to meet the people who'd changed galactic politics through sheer stubborn refusal to die. They came to establish embassies, to negotiate treaties, to propose scientific collaborations. And they came to understand what made humanity special. It wasn't the quantum weapons, though those were impressive. It wasn't the solar wind technology or the magnetic field manipulation or any of the other innovations humanity had developed. What made humanity special was simpler and more profound. They'd been pushed to the absolute brink of extinction and had somehow found the strength not just to survive, but to maintain their compassion, their creativity, their essential humanity. Other species had survived wars, but few had done it without becoming the very monsters they'd fought against. Humanity had weaponized physics itself and then chosen to use those same principles for peace once the threat was past. That was rare. That was precious. That was worth preserving. Ambassador Kethris stood before the United Nations, addressing the assembled representatives of Earth's nations. He'd learned to speak English during his time with humans, though his accent was distinctly alien. 5 years ago, my people came to your world as conquerors. We saw you as primitives, obstacles to be removed or enslaved. We were wrong in every possible way. You weren't primitive. You were innovative. You weren't weak. You were resilient. And when we pushed you to the edge, you showed us something the galaxy had nearly forgotten, that the greatest weapon isn't technology or firepower. It's the refusal to become what you fight against. He paused, letting his words settle. Today, I stand before you not as an enemy or even as a reluctant ally. I stand as a friend. The Valdrin Imperium has been transformed by our contact with humanity. We're questioning old assumptions, exploring new ideas, becoming something we couldn't have imagined before we met you. And we're not alone. Across the galaxy, species are watching Earth, wondering what you'll do next, what innovations you'll create, what problems you'll solve in ways nobody else has considered. You asked to be left alone, but the galaxy won't allow that because you're too important, too valuable, not as weapons or tools, but as partners, as friends, as the species that reminded us all what's possible when you refuse to accept defeat. So on behalf of the Valdrin Imperium, on behalf of all the species who have come to know and respect humanity, I say this: welcome to the galaxy. Welcome to the community of civilizations. Welcome to a future we'll build together, one where young species aren't crushed but nurtured, where innovation is celebrated, and where the lessons you've taught us about resilience and compassion become the foundation for something better than what came before. The speech was broadcast across Earth and transmitted to the stars via quantum entanglement communicators. Billions watched as a former enemy praised the species he'd once tried to destroy. It was a moment of hope, of validation, of recognition that humanity had earned its place among the stars. President Chen, now in her second term and graying at the temples, gave her own address in response. Ambassador Kethris speaks of what humanity taught the galaxy, but we've learned just as much from you. We've learned that we're not alone. We've learned that the universe is full of civilizations, each with their own perspectives and wisdom. We've learned that strength comes not from isolation but from connection. Earth stands ready to be part of the galactic community, not as conquerors or warriors, but as explorers, scientists, diplomats, and friends. We'll share what we've learned about quantum mechanics and stellar physics. We'll work together on problems that no single species can solve alone. And we'll remember always that the greatest technology we possess isn't written in equations or built in laboratories. It's our humanity, our compassion, our creativity, our absolute refusal to give up hope even in the darkest moments. The Valdrin came to our solar system 5 years ago expecting to find primitives. They found something else entirely. And in the process, we found each other. Not as enemies, but as two species who could learn from their mistakes and build something better. If we can do that, if humans and Valdrin can go from war to friendship in just 5 years, then anything is possible. Dr. Chen watched the speeches from her laboratory, where she was working on her latest project, a quantum telescope that could observe distant star systems in real time. Her children played nearby, growing up in a world where aliens weren't threats but neighbors, where humanity's place in the galaxy was secure. "Mom," her daughter asked during a break, "did you really save the world?" Chen smiled. "I helped, a lot of people helped, but yes, I suppose I did, though I hope nobody ever has to do what I did again." "Why not?" "Because saving the world shouldn't require turning physics into a weapon. It should happen through understanding, cooperation, and peaceful innovation. The weapons I built were necessary at the time, but I hope the work I'm doing now, the peaceful work, is what I'll actually be remembered for." "I think you'll be remembered for both," her daughter said with the simple wisdom of children. "For being brave enough to fight when you had to, and wise enough to stop when you didn't." Chen hugged her daughter tight, grateful beyond words that she lived in a universe where that choice was possible. Commander, now Fleet Admiral, Thane stood at the ceremony dedicating the new defensive platform at the edge of the solar system. It was named Unity Station, a joint construction project between humanity and 3 allied species. Valdran engineers had designed the shield systems. Mordesh architects had created the structural framework. Humans had provided the quantum sensors and power generation. The result was something none of them could have built alone, a perfect symbol of what cooperation could achieve. 5 years ago, we stood on the edge of extinction, Thane said to the assembled crowd. We faced an enemy we couldn't beat with conventional tactics, so we threw out convention. We innovated. We adapted. We survived. But more than that, we turned enemies into allies. We showed the galaxy that humans are defined not by our weapons, but by our choices. He looked up at the station, magnificent against the stars. This station represents those choices. Every time we choose understanding over fear, cooperation over isolation, innovation over stagnation, we build something that lasts. The Valdran learned that lesson. The galaxy is learning it now. And humanity will continue teaching it, one friendship at a time, one alliance at a time, one peaceful innovation at a time. We were tested, we passed, and now we get to help write the next chapter of galactic history. That's not a burden. It's a privilege. It's an honor. And it's what we've earned through courage, sacrifice, and an absolute refusal to become the monsters our enemies expected us to be. The speech ended to applause from 100 different species. Humans, Valdran, Mordesh, Thrax, and dozens of others who'd come to witness this moment. The dedication of a station wasn't normally a major event, but this was different. This was a symbol of what the galaxy could become when young species were welcomed instead of crushed. And in the depths of space, traveling on missions of exploration and diplomacy, a dozen human ships carried that message to distant stars. They met new civilizations, shared knowledge, built connections. Some encounters were smooth. Others required patience and cultural understanding. A few required showing just enough of humanity's defensive capabilities to establish respect. But the pattern held. Humanity wasn't conquerors. They were partners. They'd proven it by defeating the Valdran and then choosing friendship over revenge. That proof changed everything. 10 years after the war, Dr. Sarah Chen received a communication from an unexpected source. A young scientist from the Valdran homeworld, asking for guidance on quantum entanglement applications. The message was formal but carried an undertone of deep respect. Chen replied with careful explanations and suggested research directions. A correspondence developed, then a collaboration, then a genuine friendship. When the young Valdran scientist made a breakthrough in faster-than-light communication using principles Chen had pioneered, they insisted on listing her as a co-author on the published paper. "You taught me how to think about quantum mechanics differently," the young scientist explained during a video call. "Your species approaches physics from unique angles. You see possibilities where we see limitations. That perspective is invaluable." Chen smiled. "And your species has centuries of experience we lack. We learn from each other. That's how it should work." "Indeed, I hope someday to visit Earth and meet you in person." "You're always welcome. We'll show you around. Maybe take you to see the solar wind weapon generators. They're monuments now, deactivated and preserved as a reminder of what we had to do and what we chose not to do again." "A wise choice. Weapons should be last resorts, not first options." "Exactly. I'm glad you understand that." As the years passed, humanity continued to grow into its role in galactic civilization. New technologies emerged from the combination of human innovation and alien knowledge. Cultural exchanges flourished. Trade routes opened. Disagreements happened, but they were resolved through diplomacy rather than warfare. And when new threats emerged, as they inevitably did, humanity stood alongside its allies, not as conquerors or warriors, but as defenders, as partners, as friends who'd learned that the greatest strength wasn't in weapons, but in the bonds forged between those who chose cooperation over conflict. The galaxy had been shocked by human technology, but it was humanity's character, their refusal to be broken or corrupted by war, that truly changed everything. They'd been underestimated, attacked, pushed to the brink of extinction. And they'd responded not with hatred but with innovation, not with revenge but with friendship, not with fear but with hope. That was humanity's real gift to the galaxy. Proof that it was possible to be both strong and compassionate, both innovative and ethical, both capable of terrible weapons and wise enough not to use them unless absolutely necessary. The Valdrin had come to Earth expecting to conquer primitives. Instead, they'd found teachers. Humanity had faced extinction and discovered allies. And the galaxy, watching it all unfold, learned that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't technology or firepower. Sometimes it's simply the refusal to give up, the determination to survive, the wisdom to choose peace when war is over, and the courage to extend friendship to former enemies. That was the legacy of humanity's first contact with the galactic community. Not weapons or battles, but something far more lasting: hope. And hope, as any human could tell you, was the most powerful force in any universe. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.